come from a chaotic upbringing. I was born and raised as a child in South Korea. I later moved to Australia with my mother, having lost my father in a homicide. The next few years of my life in Australia were difficult. Meeting and making friends was difficult in the early 90s, particularly since I was quite nerdy and didn't speak much English. Something most Australian kids at the time did not relate well to. One of my scariest memories from when I was age 12 at the time, it did not even occur to me just how close I came to potentially losing my life. My mother and I were on a road trip, heading south from Melbourne to stay on the southern coast. We had stopped one evening at a small, well-kept caravan park. The caravan park was quaint and beautiful. Neat grass, nice flowers, frangipanis blooming, and a small creek which ran along the edge of the premises. It reminded me of home. I spent some time walking around on my own as my mother was taking a nap. I discovered a game and pool room. I went inside and spent probably a good few hours playing pool by myself and generally just mucking around when a young boy came in. I was very shy and so was he, but we eventually talked for a little while and became friendly. I don't remember playing any games with him, but I do recall him being pretty nervous. He kept asking me if I wanted to go back to his caravan, as his parents were making dinner soon. At first I wasn't interested and said no. We spent some more time doing things and talking as it got later. He became more pushy and asked if I liked cake and lollies. Of course, I said. That much I do remember clearly. I followed him to his caravan, which was much older than ours and quite dilapidated. He asked me to wait outside while he talked to his parents. I waited patiently for a few minutes until the door opened and a larger, older man with glasses and no shirt opened the door and asked if I would like to come inside for cake. I was scared, but I remember feeling like I had to, like it would be rude of me to leave. As I was walking the door, I heard a man behind me shout, "Hey, what's going on here?" I was quickly grabbed from the collar of my dress and pulled inside. The man then quickly tried to lock the door behind me. However, the stranger was too quick and burst in the door. He took my hand abruptly and pulled me outside, and we frantically ran away. The man asked which unit, room, and caravan I was in and took me straight there. We went inside and my mom yelled at him and asked why he was there. I was hiding in the corner crying while he explained what happened. We packed back up that night and left immediately. I was already heavily on anxiety medication after what happened back home, and we never spoke about it alone again. My mother claimed it was something I should talk to my therapist about. And every time we all spoke about it, my mother would leave the room. It scared her, and I didn't really understand why. I guess at that age it's difficult for the brain to comprehend the potential reality of the situation. Looking back on it now, it utterly scares me to the point of losing sleep. This was about 10 years ago, but I remember it clearly. At the time I was working swing shifts, so I would get off of work downtown at 12 a.m. and had to wait 30 minutes for a bus, which took an additional 30 minutes to get to the stop closest to my house, which was a little under a mile away. I rode this bus every night, and it was usually fairly empty aside from myself and a few other people getting off retail jobs who I'd see pretty often. This happened during the holidays, so stores were open super late and the closing employees rode my bus, but I was at the last stop on the line and I was usually the last person on the bus. This night, the same people as always got on the bus and got off at their regular stops. The second to last stop, I noticed that another guy was still on the bus, another guy I had never seen before, and I saw that he was watching me. I was 18 years old at the time, dressed in sort of junky clothes. I worked at a homeless shelter, so never dressed up nice or anything, but still occasionally drew the attention of creeps on the bus because I was a girl alone late at night. Whatever, I thought to myself. I'd usually just tell creepy guys to buzz off, and at the very worst, they'd say something terrible to me, and that was the end of it. By 18, I'd dealt with it plenty of times, so I wasn't particularly upset by this. But this creepy guy was sort of different. He was an overweight Middle Eastern guy dressed in a knit sweater, slacks, and wireframe glasses. Didn't say a word the entire time we were on the bus, just stared, never breaking his gaze, just transfixed on me. Finally, we got to my stop, the last stop, and he was still sitting in the back of the bus, watching me as I got off. I thanked the bus driver, got off, and realized that the dude was still on the bus. I started walking up the hill to my house like I always do, and I noticed that the bus was still sitting at the stop instead of pulling out and putting on its "to terminal" sign like it normally did. Weird, sure, but I kept walking. I had made it about 500 feet, heard the bus pull out and drive off, and then I heard someone running up behind me. Without even looking back, I knew it was the guy from the bus. He was 50 feet behind me at this point, so I could hear him heaving to catch his breath, and he yelled out, "Princess, please wait." And of course, I didn't wait, I just kept going. But he didn't stop. He kept yelling, "Please, please, princess, I want to make love to you, I have money, please, I will pay you." I didn't stop walking. I didn't want to make eye contact or acknowledge him, but I'm also walking down a dark street with no cars and no people, and he is hot on my tail, but can't keep up with me and seems pretty winded. By the time I made it down the block, he was yelling at the top of his lungs, "Princess, princess, please come back. I will pay you, just stop, please." And started sobbing, absolutely wailing, all the while yelling that he wanted to make love to me and would pay me for it and calling me princess. He wouldn't stop sobbing, and he was so loud I'm surprised he didn't wake anyone in the neighborhood up. At this point, he's still 50 feet behind me and crying. I was 5 blocks from my house and did not want to let the guy know where I lived, so I decided to call 911. He kept loudly crying and sobbing and pleading with me. I let the dispatcher know that some guy was following me and propositioning me and crying, and she could hear him sobbing in the background and said a deputy would be there soon. I live in a really skinny strip in an unincorporated part of the county, between 2 cities with their own police departments, so the response times weren't bad. And I yelled at the guy, "I just called the cops, so leave me alone." And he just stopped, standing there, sobbing. I keep walking, but slowly since I'm so close to my house. A couple minutes pass and there's lights. A sheriff was coming down the street, and when I turned around, the crying guy was nowhere to be found. The officer asked if I wanted to go look for him or if I just wanted to ride home. I didn't ever want to deal with that guy again, so I accepted the ride and asked him to just check out the area around my house after he dropped me off, since it's pretty unusual to see an overweight Middle Eastern guy in a sweater and slacks wandering around crying at 1:30 a.m. on a weeknight in a residential area. I have no idea if they found him. No idea what would happen if they did find him, since I'm not sure if anything he did was actually illegal, just incredibly creepy. Needless to say, I deadbolted my house and stayed up all night talking to a friend in a different time zone until it was morning. I moved around a lot as a kid. For a small chunk of my life, I lived in what, at the time, was considered the most dangerous neighborhood in New York City, in the projects. My family wasn't doing very well financially, and I distinctly remember our apartment being swarmed with cockroaches. We just had a mattress or 2 on the floor. Now, I don't know if I've just been surrounded by irresponsible adults for most of my life, or if the folks around me were just spread too thin, but I got into a lot of iffy situations. I know in the case of my parents, it was blatant negligence. I'm talking my bus to school was a van with the letters bus keyed onto it. Every morning I'd get in there with 3 other kids. The driver was some rando, and there were always empty beer bottles clinking around on the floor. It's wild to think about. Besides the point, but since I moved around a lot, I often ended up making friends with the kids from my apartment building rather than my school. I spent my free time in silly ways. I'd feed pigeons off the balcony, fed them so much they'd just fly back there in the adjacent balconies, chill in the morning waiting for me. Bird poo would just rain down below, angering all of the other residents in the building. I also would host paper bag puppet shows and invite all the kids to watch them on the staircase. That was a bit of a nuisance. Just way too much energy for my size. From holding these events, I ended up meeting a lot of parents. So one night, as I'm wrapping up one of my spectacular puppet shows, a lady who lived on the top floor of the building approaches me. She asks me if I could babysit her kid on that Friday night. I'm 9 years old at the time, by the way. Her child, Emily, is 5. I'm not sure why this woman asked me because I was clearly very ostentatiously being a child. I say yes because, well, why not? I mention this to my mother for permission, who naturally agrees. The idea is that since we live on the bottom floor, there's little to go wrong. I should also mention that I have an older brother. He was 14 at the time. So Friday rolls around. I'm over at this lady's place with Emily. Her parents have just left 30 minutes prior. We're running around tearing the apartment up. I still have way too much energy. A knock at the door. I run over to the door. I should have checked the peephole, but I'm honestly too short. At this point in my life, no one has told me to never open the door for a stranger, so I open it. On the other side stands a man. He's very tall, has a mustache, looks like he's in his 40s. I ask him what he wants. He says that he's a friend of Sam's, Emily's father, and that he was coming by to say hi. I tell him Sam isn't around. Dumb, I know. He tells me that it's not a problem, that Sam had told him he's coming home soon and to wait right here. He pushes past me, strolls over to the couch like he's right at home, and sits. Someone should be watching you kids in the meantime anyway, right? The guy was friendly and so self-assured. I was confused. I didn't know Emily's family too well, and I didn't know who they were good friends with. I knew nothing. Maybe this guy came over here all the time. Emily didn't seem to have any strong reaction, so I just figured everything was okay. Maybe Sam really was coming home. Perhaps they forgot something, or there was something important to talk to this guy about. This guy knew his name, after all. So we're all sitting on the couch, and he's talking to us about his favorites, his favorite color, his favorite food, whatever. It's been about 20 minutes, no Sam. This guy is getting increasingly physically comfortable with Emily. At one point, she was trying to dodge him, putting his arm around her. Something about the situation wasn't sitting right, and I could tell that she actually probably didn't really know him. Something was hanging in the air. Something was scaring that little girl. So, well, what do? There was no way to check his story. Emily's parents didn't leave me any way to contact them. I still brush it off since the situation still seems completely normal in my innocuous eyes. We're all just talking. Nothing's going wrong, technically. We even start playing tag. But then I begin to notice that whenever I'd walk towards the entrance area, he'd somehow intercept me in a friendly way. He'd glide me in the other direction or call me over for a high five. He'd even let himself get tagged. As friendly and fearless as I swore I was, something was scaring me too. So I trusted that. Another 20 minutes, no Sam. I was getting panicked, but I knew my parents weren't home, only my brother. Thankfully, I remembered that this family had a phone. I had seen it as I was twirling around with Emily earlier. Now, my brother is fiercely protective of me, still is, always had been since day one. After I was born, there was none of that sibling attention, jealousy stuff. He started crying day 2 because he thought I had an eye infection. So, well, I pretend I'm tired of tag. They sit down and I start singing, skipping around. Who knows, I'm trying to make a big show about how nothing is going on. I was big into acting at the time, wanted to be an actress, borderline obsessed with the idea. I'd act out fake scenes at home all the time, by myself, with others, like a weirdo for years. Hence the puppet shows. But well, I was good at hiding emotion, good at playing roles. So, I'm singing. Role of a lifetime here. I need to figure out how to talk to my brother fast while I sing without my voice shaking. This man says some creepy thing about how I have such a sweet voice. I didn't think it was creepy at the time, but now it gives me the heebie-jeebies. And as he reaches over to grab something that's dropped on the floor, I notice he has a pocket knife or a box cutter, something sharp. Voice shakes, my heart skips. I try not to make eye contact. Luckily, he doesn't realize, I think. I say something along the lines of, "Oh no, I forgot to feed my hamster." I spin, literally spin over to the phone, which I'm sure this guy never noticed was sitting behind a plant. I didn't have a hamster. "Let me just call my brother, he'll feed her." I holler, "Boom chicka wow wow." Before the man can say or do anything, like I can't hear him, I dial my brother as fast as I can. The man is on edge now, noticing the phone but also recognizing I've just dialed someone. It's like the top half of his face is glaring at me, but the bottom is kind of fake smiling, apprehensive. My brother picks up. He's annoyed, as brothers always are. He thinks I'm just playing upstairs, supervised. He knows where I am, but my mother neglected to tell him the babysitting situation. "Hello, I forgot to feed Skippy." "What? What do you want?" "I forgot to feed Skippy. Can you feed her for me?" Are you trying to prank me? Is this a prank call? Seriously? Can you hear me? Seriously, she'll get sick. Cut it out. No, can you hear me now? I use my nickname for him. "I forgot to feed Skippy. Can you feed her for me?" At this point, he realizes I wouldn't be using his name if I really were prank calling him. The man is now holding Emily, throwing her up and down in the air. I'm losing it every time he throws her up. She's visibly not having a good time. She starts crying. He's trying to calm her. It's chaos. The scene is breaking down. Fast. Too fast. What are you talking about? Is everything okay? No, you have to do it now. She gets hungry. Just play later. Stomp, stomp. Is someone there? Yes, the green baggie. Oh. Stay calm, I'm coming. Hangs up. I believe there were 12 floors. The kid flies up so fast, no idea how, starts knocking on the door. Before the guy can get in my way, I sprint over and open it. My brother, being the smart cookie he is, tries to keep the situation calm. Seems he's called the cops by now. He swings the door open, says something along the lines of, "Man, it smells in here," and props it there with a box nearby. I realized later he was trying to keep the door open for the cops, for us to run given the chance or for the neighbors to hear in case something happened. My brother introduces himself as well, says he got bored downstairs, knew we were up here, wanted to watch a movie, and heard this apartment had a TV. The guy starts trying to fake introduce himself as he puts down Emily, then just bolts. We don't follow. The cops show up eventually. They don't do much, presumably because the guy was gone and there were other violent crimes happening in the neighborhood. Emily's parents show up, and after the waterworks, they thank my brother. After giving the man's description to Sam, he still didn't know who we were talking about. Regardless, we all end up okay and life went on. Still, I had no idea what that man wanted from us. I don't know if he was trying to rob Emily's parents or had something more sinister in mind. He seemed to know that no adults were going to be home, so that he might have been on the staircase that night Emily's mother asked me to watch her, and he just sat and played with us for so long. Every time I think about this night, I feel that panic all over again. I'm happy to say that most of the people in this country go their entire lives without encountering some of the monsters that exist in this otherwise beautiful place. Unfortunately, I have not been so fortunate. Before I start, I would like to bore you with some backstory. I have been working as an IT systems administrator for a few years now, and have met many people who I occasionally moonlight as a repairwoman for. Over the years, friends have told me that they occasionally get messages and phone calls from strangers asking for basic computer repairs for cheaper than they could otherwise find locally. For years now, I have been overly cautious of people, places, and objects that don't feel right. I have learned to always trust my gut instinct and to err on the side of caution. This story, however, is the one and only time that I ignored that instinct. Around 4 years ago, I was contacted over text message by a local man. He was direct and straight to the point. The conversation was pretty basic. He asked me if I could look at his computer as he heard about me from a friend. I said yes and explained the issue he was having. PC had suddenly stopped booting. Occasionally he could manage to get it running, but it would operate incredibly slowly and crash quickly. I told the man that I would need to inspect the PC myself. However, it sounded like a textbook hard drive failure. I asked the unknown man to call me to discuss an option and where he would bring the PC for me to look at it. His response was, "No phone calls. Where can I drop it off and when? I need the things off it as soon as possible." This seems sketchy to me at first. Most people like to talk over the phone about the issues they are having and try and sort them remotely, and at the very least know how much it's going to cost. I eventually brushed it off, thinking maybe he was just well off and was looking for a fast turnaround, which he knows only a hobbyist would be able to achieve in this area. I discussed a time where he could drop the PC off at my work and asked what time he would like to drop the PC off. He didn't reply. The next morning, at the door of my work, there was a PC on the ground with a post-it note crudely marked with my name in black felt tip marker. My boss was not super impressed, as our business has quite strict security and members of the public are not usually allowed onto the premises after hours. I was ultimately very confused, however. I never got a reply from this man, and as far as I knew, he had done a runner. By now, I am convinced this guy has some sort of social anxiety. A refusal to talk on the phone and deliberately drop the PC off without a word of warning before our business. Not a client-based business, this is an office block. Even opened its doors to its workers. Again, alarm bells are kind of ringing at this stage. However, there was no reason for me to really worry. It's not as if though he seemed on edge or dangerous, not that I could really tell in the few text messages we had sent each other. I proceeded as planned, ran diagnostic tools, confirmed it was a dead drive, removed the drive, replaced it with a repurposed one, reinstalled the operating system, and proceeded to start the recovery process. For those of you not informed on the process, here's the basic rundown. Pull the old hard drive, plug it into a working PC either directly or with a dock, create a virtual clone of the drive, and then perform the recovery using specialized software on the clone. Not the actual hard drive, as it may fail during the process. I did this with good results and managed to recover pretty much everything. I copied all of his files over to his new drive, reinstalled the applications I could see he had, and sent the computer on its merry way. Later that day, I sent the man a message stating that his computer was fixed and he could come pick it up sometime during business hours. He responds a few hours later saying that he was not going to be available until after work. Okay, I thought, that's fair enough, he's probably working too. At first, the man asked if he could meet me at my house after work the following day, which by this stage was definitely too weird. I obviously declined and insisted on meeting him at the local post office at around 6 p.m. By this stage, I was kind of getting pretty bad heebie-jeebies. I decided to have a friend come with me just in case things got weird. I have a male friend at work who was happy to come with me. We arrive at the post office a little early and sit on the small bench out the front. About 15 minutes pass and the guy finally arrives. By this stage, it's getting pretty dark. Thinking back now, I'm pretty sure he delayed it as much as he could. The man walks up to us slowly in a kind of predatory way, creeping forward as to make as little noise as possible, even though we knew he was there. His gray jeans stained with what looked like white paint, wearing a dark hoodie covering his head. All we could see was his face and the protruding long gray tattered beard. The man stands in front of us while I introduce myself and my friend. The man does not react at all, instead seemingly looking me up and down for what felt like minutes. I could smell his breath from where I was standing, and his silence was only broken by the sound of his nose hairs whistling as he breathed. I eventually try and speak to him about his PC, stating that it was in fact a dead hard drive. However, before I could finish speaking, he interrupts me mid-sentence with a raspy voice, the kind of voice that makes you feel a tingle at the back of your throat. "Is that your computer?" I responded, "Yes." Did you get everything back?" The man quickly responded, in more of a statement rather than a question. "Yes, I told you in the text message." In a quick and angry voice, he then asked me, "Did you go through any of it?" "Of course not." "Are you sure?" At this point, I was getting really weirded out, and my friend could tell I felt threatened. I do not deal well with older men, and he knew it. He swiftly responded with, Look, man, the computer's fixed and you have your data back. Do you want it or not? I looked at my friend, then back at the man. He looked me up and down one last time, thrusted some notes into my hand, quickly grabbed the PC, and swiftly but silently walked away to the car park. We got back in the car, and I soon realized the man had paid me $400 for a simple repair. We never discussed the price, as that usually happens early in the discussion, or as they return for their computer, but usually this would only cost around $150. I was shocked and very happy. My friend was not so happy. Something felt very, very off about that man, and now I'm even more convinced. Did you notice how intent he was on you not going through his data? I agreed. Something weird was going on. Although I'm not supposed to, and doing so is kind of a breach of privacy, my itch to know what he was so paranoid about was strong. The next day at work, having been bugged by my friend, I finally decided to take a look at the contents of the clone drive. I noticed pretty quickly it was quite large, around 250 gigabytes for what was essentially a Windows install and some basic applications, photos, and a few downloads. It can be tricky to find what is taking up so much space sometimes, but using a tool like Space Sniffer can really help. I booted the program up and quickly found a zip file hidden in his Windows folder under a very long tree of folders. Inside these folders were other empty folders. Some had empty documents in them, others were completely empty. I jumped straight to the zip file and opened it. Luckily not password protected. What I found inside makes me feel sick, even more so given what I have been through in my life. Thousands and thousands of images and videos of children, some suggestive, others more so. I opened 3 or 4 photos and immediately felt lightheaded and sick. I quickly closed the zip folder, shocked. Oddly enough, it did not settle in until sometime later what I had found. All I was thinking about before that was what would happen if a colleague saw those images in the building. Little did occur to me what kind of threat this man was and what now lay on my desk. I told my friend, who told me to call the police ASAP. I did and was asked not to touch the image further and to come into the station to make a report with my friend. They later confiscated the drive I had copied the clone to, and I never got it back. I was told by police a week or so later that the phone number the man used to send me text messages was a web-based application, and the phone number was fake. However, they had identified the man thanks to the metadata stored on the hard drive clone, and that the man probably did not realize a copy was made of his drive in the process of recovery. They also told me the man was being looked for. However, his last known residency was in a different state. The police believed he was staying somewhere without a lease, with a friend, or simply squatting and had since skipped town. It has been 4 years now and I have heard nothing. I'm still paranoid he is going to come to my office building again or follow me home. I have surrounded my office with self-defense items just in case, and my home feels safe. However, work not so much. Like I said earlier, most people go through life without ever seeing the scum of society. I've experienced it myself 3 times now, and I'm done. Never ever again. So please, creepy man with the most spine-chilling raspy voice I have ever heard, please do not come to my workplace. You almost cost me my job, and the thought of what you might have done in the past or what you might do in the future haunts me to this day. I had just moved into an apartment complex and had only a bed, a TV, a rocking chair, and an Xbox One. I work in a town that is about an hour away, and they didn't have anything available that I could move into. So this big city was the next closest place that was also in my price range. The first few weeks play out the same. I get up, shower, go to work for 10 hours, come home, eat, watch a little Netflix, go to sleep, repeat. On my days off, I travel 3 hours away to see my wife and kids. Now, we aren't divorced or separated. I had to relocate from the town we lived to start my career in asset protection as an APM, or asset protection manager. One night, as I was going through my evening routine, someone knocks on my door. It is a woman, maybe 5'7", brown hair, skinny. She looked like she was methed out of her skull. Her eyes were barely even open. She asked to talk to someone named Jareth. I told her no one by that name lived here. She said he did. She said she was here last Thursday and he was here. She wanted to buy stuff from him and this was the address she was given. I once again told her no one named Jareth lived here and shut the door on her. She started banging on the door, crying how she needed to get her fix. I yelled at her. After a few moments, I heard someone yell at her to shut up or they were calling the cops. The banging stopped. Never saw her again. I sat back down to continue watching the movie I had on. I started thinking about what the woman had said. She couldn't have been here last Thursday. I was off work last Thursday and Friday with my wife and children. I started to look around more closely. Nothing seemed out of place. I checked all the windows. Nothing was cracked or broken. All the security bars were locked in their places. There were no upper attic spaces nor crawl spaces. Nothing. I felt a little more secure and went about my night as usual. The next days off, I made sure everything was locked and nothing was out of place. I went to see my wife as usual, told her what had happened. She suggested I take the pellet gun. Now I know, what is a pellet gun going to do? Well, in her thinking, it looked like a real gun. In the dark, no one could tell the difference. Same for at a distance. Plus, it had a CO2 cartridge in it and 10 pellets, so I took it. When I got back, I looked around. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was missing. I put my stuff up as usual and turned on my Xbox. This is where I noticed something was off. When it powers on, it takes you to the home screen. On this screen, you can see the last thing you were on plus the previous things you have done. When I left it last, the Netflix app should have been the first one on there. But it wasn't. Instead, it was Battlefield 1. The one before that was Mortal Kombat X. Someone had been using my Xbox. I once again did a thorough search of the apartment. Nothing. It was a couple of days after the guy across from me approached me while I was getting out of my vehicle. He said that a lot of people were coming by the apartment on certain nights and were making a lot of noise and that it keeps his daughter up and if I could keep it down or just stop doing whatever it was that I was doing on those nights. I was confused. I must have shown it because his expression changed. He asked me if I was the one who was having people over at odd hours on the night. I told him no. I proceeded to tell him the things that were happening. I told him I'm 200 miles away on my days off. We both came to the same conclusion that someone was getting into my apartment when I wasn't there. I made the decision not to go see my family one week to see if the person using my apartment would show up. Of course, no one came that week or the week after. It dawned on me at work one day during a conversation about how shoplifters would try to see what vehicle you drove to know if you were there, and that's when it hit me. Whoever was using my apartment knew what I drove. With that in mind, I waited till my next days off to set my trap. On the said day, I parked my vehicle 3 complexes down and walked back. I unscrewed all my light bulbs and waited in the corner in the living room. I let my neighbor know that I was doing this in case any trouble occurred. I put my phone to its lowest brightness and had my camera ready, flash and all. I waited for 6 hours, which felt like forever before it happened. I heard the front doorknob jiggle. I got up, phone in one hand and a pellet gun in the other. The door opened and someone entered, shutting it behind them. Then I heard a click, and then another. They were trying to switch on the lights. I then saw a light from the doorway. They had their phone out and were making their way into the room I was in. As soon as they entered the doorway, I snapped a picture. The brightness of the flash caught him completely off guard. He was momentarily stunned, cursing at me trying to make his way back to the front door. I yelled at him to get out and never return. He reached into his pocket, dropping something as he pulled out a small pocket knife. I immediately raised the pellet gun and cocked the hammer. That stopped him completely. He dropped the knife, opened the door, and ran out. My neighbor who had heard me yelling was waiting outside of his place when the man ran out. He saw me run out of my apartment, gun and all, and asked if I had shot him. I told him no, and that it was a pellet gun, but the man didn't know. I went back to the door and retrieved the pocket knife and what he dropped. It was a key to my door. Don't know how he got it, but he had it. I showed the picture to my neighbor. He thought he recognized him, but wasn't sure. I stayed up late that night, calling my wife and telling her what happened. The next day I went over to the complex office and told them what happened. I brought up the fact that he had a key to my door and I wanted to know why he did. They weren't sure. Then I showed them the picture of the man. They knew right then how he had the key. Turns out the person who was going to my apartment complex was a maintenance worker for them. He had been one of the ones renovating my apartment before I moved in. They are given keys and he must have made a copy of one. Then for nights at a time, he would use it to do whatever it was he did. I must have put a hamper in his nightly business when I moved in. That is, until he figured out my routine. The man was, of course, fired from his job and prohibited from entering the grounds again. I was given 3 months free rent. I never pressed charges and just kind of let it go. I have a real gun now, just in case. My neighbor and I struck up a friendship and we now watch each other's places when we are out of town. Hopefully this never happens again to anyone else, and yes, I had the locks changed in case you were wondering. I bought a house. It's not haunted, I don't think. Truth be told, I haven't been here long enough to determine the one way or the other. It's old, historical even. It was sold after years on the market following the previous owner moving to a senior living center. Her children left literally everything, from the bed to the bottle of soy sauce in the kitchen. So, it's eerie, but not haunted, I don't think. I'm 25 and have lived a life. I've always been a bore, and I assume this is because every aspect of my life that is out of my control is so wild that at the end of the day I really just enjoy a warm cookie and a nap. I've had the same few friends for years, I don't go out, and I don't date. My number is only given out in a professional setting. I am boring, and I'm happy. To get back to the story, I bought this house a few months ago. It needed some minor renovations. There was carpeting in the bathroom, for example, but it wasn't enough to scare me away. I made my first offer well below the asking price, and it was accepted within the hour. That definitely set off some alarm bells, but the house passed every inspection, and I was getting a heck of a deal, so whatever. The deal went through fairly painlessly, and I was moved in by the end of that month. Now, one thing you're never ready for when moving into your own house is paying all of your bills yourself. I have been renting up to this point, but all of my landlords took things like taxes, utilities, etc. out of my monthly rent. I saved where I could, forewent cable, signed up for city waste disposal rather than private, and bundled my internet and landline. Now, I couldn't give a crap less about having a landline, but the bundle deal was cheaper than internet alone. A guy came by to set everything up while I pulled up carpeting and had the floorboards exposed. He set up the phone line in the kitchen and went on his merry way. For the first few weeks, I hardly noticed the phone. It was in the back corner of one of the countertops, completely out of the way. I honestly forgot it existed until one day, it rang. I didn't even know the number of the line, but it rang. Since it obviously couldn't be anyone I knew, since they wouldn't know the number either, I let it go. It was probably a spam call. Things carried on like that for a few weeks. I'd be minding my own business when the sharp electric chimes echoed through my tiny home. I turned the ringer down as low as I could, and the rings eventually became part of the background noise of the house. Then, the messages started. They weren't IRS scams or anything like that. They weren't anything at all. Just 30 seconds of dead air. Like the calls, this was odd but not frightening. The same thing had happened on my cell phone a couple of times, so I didn't really think anything of it, until I noticed the pattern. My job has me working odd, inconsistent hours. No week is like the one before. It's so bad that if I need to schedule an appointment, I need to ask for a full day off at least a week in advance, because who knows when I'd actually have free time if I didn't demand it. Knowing this, what I noticed was almost impossible. Whenever I came home, I never had any missed calls or messages waiting for me. The calls and messages only ever came through when I was home, when I should be answering the phone. I started to wonder if someone was watching me. I live in a quiet neighborhood. mostly retirees and history nerds. There's a local bar down the block and some rednecks about 2 blocks west, but that's about it. There's a school within walking distance, so legally no convicted idiots can live there. What I'm getting at here is that I live in a safe place, much safer than any of my other homes. Still, anything is possible. I get an alarm system and some cameras. I also started writing down the phone calls, keeping track of how many came in and when, to make sure I wasn't imagining the pattern I noticed. I wasn't. After a few more weeks, I got used to it. Random call, feed the cat, blank message, water the plants, random call, switch the laundry. Then the voice came through. "I know you're home," it sang, taunting me. "Why won't you talk to me?" From then on, the once blank messages would continue like that. My name, my cat's name. It would even ask for my friends' names after they visited. The voice kind of sounds like a man, but it's so distorted that I can't be sure. Maybe a man speaking through a voice changer. Maybe a woman, I don't know. I don't know how they have this number. I don't know how they have my schedule. I don't know how they know these details about my life. And I don't know what to do. I'm something of an avid cyclist and have been all my life. It's my preferred method of transportation. I also live in a town that's famous for its ever-expanding network of pedestrian and bike paths. We've even won some awards for them over the years. I'm also an Iraq veteran. This may explain something that happens later. The summers where I live tend to be quite humid but otherwise pleasant, so one gorgeous August day off from work I decided to go for a ride. I didn't have a specific end destination in mind, but I got this idea to ride along a southbound trail that I don't go through very often. There are enough traffic lights along that section that it should have been a relatively safe ride, and it also goes along the border of a rather popular city park. I figured there'd be plenty of people there, especially on such a nice day. Well, I was kinda sorta right about that. About 20 minutes or so into my otherwise smooth pleasure ride, I came up to a couple of bends in the path not long before the park. There were a few people jogging or walking their dogs, 1 or 2 people walking by themselves. So far, nothing unusual. The trails are paved and divided into 2 lanes, just like a regular road. I'm in the southeastern United States, where you're supposed to stay in the right-hand lane. Not far ahead, I noticed a dark-haired dude walking in the wrong lane. It's not illegal to do so, but it can be dangerous. I noticed that he seemed to have no regard whatsoever for others walking in the proper direction and almost bumped a few of them without a thought. I figured maybe he was on something. But I also saw that he was wearing what looked like an old navy blue puffy jacket on a humid day in August. Call it situational awareness or what have you, but no one in their right mind wears a fall jacket in the summertime south of the Mason-Dixon line. I'm about 30 or so feet away from this guy when he finally sees me, and my stomach drops as I swear to y'all on my own life he pauses mid-step, and then his face melts into a downward-facing jokerish smile. Then he opens his jacket, revealing a sweaty gray shirt underneath as he reached inside and for something I couldn't see. And that's when something in my head goes, nuh-uh. I don't know what some of you reading this might do if faced with something like this, but I got this insane idea. Instead of turning around, instead of screaming or stopping, I pedaled faster. Without a second thought, I just spun the pedals as hard as I could with the intention of charging him like a medieval jouster. Dangerous moments like these may only last a few seconds in reality, but I swear it felt like I was building up speed and barreling towards this guy for a good minute or 2. I don't know why my brain decided that charging him head-on was the right thing to do, and maybe it could have just easily have gotten me hurt or killed, but I didn't care. I can point out Mosul, Baghdad, and Fallujah on an unlabeled map of the Middle East. I was scared, of course, but something I haven't felt since I've been over there drove me to do something. He sees me speeding up and hunkering down, but isn't getting out of the way. Only within seconds, maybe less than 2 feet shy of slamming into him, Does he realize what's about to happen? Or it could have been the war face, I don't know, and then drives to the left. Swoosh. I don't stop. I don't look back. I don't even think about it. I just go and keep going. I later happen to pass a female jogger or two coming the opposite direction and give them a heads up about the guy. They promptly turn around. I sought a different route that day and locked my doors when I got home. I haven't been on that stretch of the trail since. I didn't think to tell the police at the time, given that I wasn't actually harmed and that just acting scary isn't a crime in and of itself, but maybe I should have. But about a month later, a local news story crossed my Facebook feed. The fifth rotting body in less than 2 years was just discovered near the same area of the trail near a creek. Cops said that they weren't sure exactly how a homeless man had died, but that it didn't look like a natural death. All of the victims were known vagabonds, people that nobody would otherwise care about. I'm not saying that I definitely bull-rushed a serial killer, but to this day, I often ponder that possibility. So this happened to me back in 2013, shortly before New Year's. I am a female born and bred in South Africa, but at the time I was living in London and had recently turned 21. A friend of mine from South Africa had traveled up to London for a holiday in early December. When we met up, she invited me to come spend New Year's with her in Paris, as she had some family who lived there that had invited her to stay with them. Not having anything planned, I thought this sounded like a really great idea, and also I am a sucker for the Eiffel Tower. She was planning to take the Eurostar, but being quite broke at the time, I decided to book a cheap megabus up alone. So she naturally arrived in record time during the day, and I was due to arrive sometime in the evening. I told her I would call her when I arrived, and she said that her and her cousins would come pick me up. After a really long trip, I got dropped off at the bus stop. The bus stop was right by a mall, or in a mall. This is where my memory gets a bit hazy. I remember calling my friend when I arrived and her telling me to walk through the mall and to meet her at a specific parking lot close to one of the mall entrances. So there I was. It was late, it was dark, I'm alone. I'm sitting on my trolley suitcase with my back against the wall and my other smaller bag standing next to me, waiting patiently for them to arrive. The area I was sitting in was well lit, but at the time it was deserted. I could see people in the distance milling about, but no one in near proximity to me. I remember feeling safe at the time as I was right by a busy mall. Also, possibly relevant to say, but in South Africa you need to be on your guard 24/7 as crime is rampant. However, a few months living in London had kind of eased me into a space where I had become a far less guarded and less vigilant person. I guess I became somewhat implicitly trusting of my surroundings, which is naive looking back, but I was young and dumb. So there I am, twiddling thumbs. I suddenly noticed what looked to be 2 older men walking towards me. They must have been about in their mid-30s, hard to remember exactly. They walk directly over to me and strike up what appears to be an innocent conversation, simply asking if I was okay and if someone would be coming for me soon. Initially, in keeping with my naive mindset, I didn't feel alarmed or threatened. I genuinely thought they were just being friendly and looking out for me. We talk a little longer and they ask me more questions like where I'm from, what I'm doing in Paris, who I'm staying with. I remember the guy in particular was more talkative and charming, whilst the other was a bit quieter and seemed visibly angsty. Think restless body language. Now remember, I said I was sitting on my trolley suitcase with my back against the wall. I noticed that their body positioning begins to alter slightly, like they were coming a bit closer, but also positioning themselves so that I was somewhat cornered. As soon as I become aware of this, the entire tone of the interaction shifted for me, and every alarm bell possible started going off. I started to politely attempt to end the conversation by saying my friend and her cousins would be there shortly, but that it was nice to meet them. The one guy suddenly told me that I should come with them in his car, the more talkative, charismatic one. I tried to decline, but he began to become more adamant and almost urgent about it. As I could tell he was going to reach for me, out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone walking brusquely towards us. Their eyes darted over and they suddenly dashed. I realized it was a security guard as he came closer. He came straight up to me and told me to gather my belongings and walk with him to sit inside the mall. I quietly obliged. As he settled me in, he told me that he had been observing the interaction on their security cameras, and they decided it would be best to intervene. They said based on the situation, it looked like a possible abducting waiting to happen. So incredibly thankful they did, as I don't know what would have happened if they had come any later. I called my friend and she apologized and said they were nearly there. I was a bit shaken by the incident, but mostly just relieved nothing worse had happened. So I guess to the creepy older men who tried to get me to come into their car, no thanks. This happened last year around Christmas time as I was on my way to visit my parents. I'm traveling from Nashville, Tennessee to Kent Island, Maryland, and it's me and my dog, Kona, a mix of pit bull, bulldog, and husky lab. I'm a tall, fairly built man, for context. It's about a 12-hour drive, and it sucked. When we got to Upper Virginia around Harrisonburg, I was tired and Kona needed to go potty. I also needed to gas, so I pulled into a gas station around 10 p.m. I pulled up to pump and started getting gas. While the gas was going, I left Kona in the car and went inside to get some food and a much-needed Red Bull. When I walked out of the gas station, I noticed a slender, raggedy man standing by my gas pump. As I reach my car, this man tells me that he is homeless and is in need of extra clothing, given that it is very cold outside. I am empathetic. However, all I have in my truck are presents for my family and my little amount of clothing for myself. I apologize and tell him I can't help him but wish him luck. He says he noticed I have boxes in my truck and that anything will help. I tell him I have no clothes for him but offered him the food I just bought in the gas station, but he refuses. He grows agitated and asks if he can have the heavy coat that I'm wearing. A very nice pea coat that was a graduation gift from my mom. I tell him no and that I need it. He starts yelling and telling me that I am spoiled and live off my parents. Not true. I am frightened and Kona jumps into the driver's seat to observe. He reached out to grab my shoulder and I back up and bump into my truck. He approaches about 1 foot away from me and says, "I said I need your help," loudly with one hand on my shoulder and another in his pocket. At this point, Kona goes absolutely nuts in my truck, barking at this man and snarling her teeth. I can hear her bark and so can he. He looks at Kona and I tell him, "Leave me alone right now, or I'll open this door and my dog will rip your throat out." This seemed to do the trick. He backed away and I quickly opened the door and hopped in, forcing my dog out of the driver's seat. She's still going nuts and I wait until he's far enough away to put the gas pump away. I start to drive away. On the side of the gas station, I see the same man jump into the passenger side of a black SUV. I was going to get my dog a big steak, but about 5 minutes later, she ended up crapping in my truck, so I think she was a little scared. It was a pretty standard evening, commuting home to the rural village that I live. It had been getting dark early for a while now, and with this being my first year here, I was still a little nervous walking down the unlit roads, but there hadn't been anything to worry about yet. I disembarked the train and popped into the shop just off the end of the platform. To set the scene of how rural it is, there isn't really a station as such, just 2 platforms in the middle of the village with a level crossing. The road leading away from the station is lit by a single light every 100 or so yards, which then disappear about 300 yards and the road is pretty much pitch black except for a car's headlights passing along every now and then. I got what I needed from the shop, walked out and made it about 50 yards up the road when I noticed this guy just standing there, looking at me from the other side of the street. He had a vacant expression, but his eyes were completely transfixed on me. I had a feeling I recognized him, but I wasn't sure where from. Regardless, I maintained eye contact with him and continued to walk until he was pretty much just a silhouette. I made it to the second light, and shortly after I passed it, I noticed a shadow appearing alongside me. I turned quickly, and sure enough, it was the same guy. He stopped dead and just stared at me again, like we were playing some game of What's the Time, Mr. Wolf. Seeing him in the light, it was hard to distinguish his age. He looked like he could have been 20, but also looked like he could have been in his 30s. He was quite scrawny, bleach blonde hair on top, and he was holding this long black umbrella, but it hadn't been raining, so I wasn't sure why he was carrying it. I asked him if he was okay and if he wanted anything. He just replied with, "Nothing, thank you," and started to walk ahead of me. Annoyingly, he was walking in the same direction as I was, so I gave him a few minutes head start before moving again. I made it onto the unlit section of street and a couple of cars passed me heading in the same direction. I made a point of looking down the street as they did, but fortunately, he wasn't anywhere to be seen. I picked up the pace and knew I'd be home in a few minutes if I maintained this speed, but within about 30 seconds, another car passed and up ahead was the silhouette of this guy, which I could make out because of the shape of the umbrella. It was obvious he wasn't moving, so as I got closer, I shouted, "What do you want?" He didn't answer, just scurried across the road and into the entrance of the estate on which I live. I had no choice but to follow, otherwise I wasn't getting home, but I decided to avoid walking directly to my house in case he followed me. I noticed he took the main road through the estate, so I quickly shuffled off to a road that goes around the back of the houses, with a couple of side roads that join back onto the main road. As I reached the top of the back road, the guy obviously cut through one of the side roads and came up ahead of me. I decided to stop dead, and he did the same, before all of a sudden swinging his umbrella hard onto the floor from above his head, like he was chopping wood. It felt like when you see a bull ready to charge, brushing their foot along the floor. The sound of metal hitting the floor obviously drew the attention of one of the nearby houses as a woman came out and asked what was going on. The guy ran back towards the main road while I just stood there, partly in disbelief and partly in terror. I explained everything to the woman, and we decided to call the police and make them aware of this guy being in the area in case anything was to happen. But other than sending a car around to do a lap, there wasn't anything else they could do. I spoke to my girlfriend about it, told her what had happened, and she reminded me where I had seen him before. Last year before I moved in, I'd gone to visit her and passed him on my way back to the station. I remember looking back after he passed because he made a point of staring as he did, and he had stopped, just staring at me as I walked down the road. I made it all the way to the station and could still see his silhouette a couple of 100 yards back up the road. He hadn't moved in the whole time I had been walking away from him. I haven't seen him since that second encounter, but he must be a local. I asked in the shop about the guy with the bleach blonde hair, and they don't know who he is, so I'm at a loss at the moment. Let's hope I don't have any more encounters with this weirdo. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, our Let's Read official, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.